everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're exploring the fourth juz of the Quran,
Specifically, some really thought-provoking passages from Surah An-Nisa.
which, for anyone who hasn't gotten to it yet, is all about, well, women.
It offers some really incredible insights into how we interact with, well, everyone around us, right?
Exactly. Family, community, you name it. It's about approaching those relationships with fairness, compassion, and a true thirst for knowledge. Where do we even start with all this?
Well, I think it's fascinating how these verses, they actually weave together this idea of personal conduct with, like, wider social responsibility. And almost offer a blueprint for building a just society, you know?
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. And like right off the bat, so many verses just emphasize seeking truth. It's like this constant reminder to really, really engage with the message of the Quran, not just to go through the motion. You know what I mean?
It's about internalizing those teachings, yeah, not just hearing them.
And I feel like verse 95 really sums that up perfectly, right? Follow the religion of Abraham, inclining toward truth. That call to follow Abraham's way, I mean, it's so significant. Because in Islam, he's considered like the father of monotheism, right? This perfect example of submitting completely to God's will.
So it's like actively seeking understanding and then aligning your life with those truths, just like Abraham did.
Exactly, exactly. And you know what's so interesting? How these verses then connect that personal striving to personal responsibility. Remember those verses 98 and 99?
Yeah, yeah. They talk about not just blindly following other people.
Even people who, they might seem super knowledgeable about religion, but the verses are saying if what they're doing clashes with Allah's teachings, well, we shouldn't just go along with it.
That's huge, especially, thinking about today. It's so easy to get caught up in all these different opinions, different interpretations. You really have to think critically.
Yeah. You have to weigh what you're hearing against the core values of your faith.
So it's about taking ownership, really taking ownership of your understanding.
Yes. And that sense of responsibility, it isn't just about your personal faith, right? Because these verses, they get so specific about how we should be treating other people,
Yeah.
especially the vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely. Like the level of detail when it talks about caring for orphans, that really stood out to me.
It's incredible.
Yeah, because it doesn't just say, be nice to orphans, It's like these meticulous instructions for their care, this emphasis on justice and compassion. It's very tangible,
It's true. You see it so clearly in verses 2, 5, and 6. This really strong prohibition against taking advantage of orphans. Like it even gets into specifics, saying their wealth can only be used for them, not for someone else's personal gain.
And it goes way beyond just finances too, right? There's that whole part about making sure orphans are cared for, clothed properly, spoken to kindly, even when you get to marriage, right? Making sure it's actually in their best interest.
Yeah, it's like a completely holistic approach to their well-being. It's amazing.
And there's even that section on how guardians should be handling an orphan's wealth.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. Aiming for the orphan to be self-sufficient, ideally not even taking a fee if possible. Or if you're a guardian who's less well off, only taking what's reasonable for the service you're providing.
It paints such a clear picture. Care for them like they're your own. Be mindful at every step. Their well-being is paramount. It's really powerful.
It is. And it's so interesting because the text, it kind of broadens this responsibility too. Like in verse 5, you have this mention of being just to, and this is interesting, to the weak-minded.
So it's expanding that circle of care, right? It's not just about orphans.
Exactly. It includes anyone who's vulnerable, anyone who, for whatever reason, lacks capacity.
It's like this ripple effect of compassion going outward from the most vulnerable people in a society. And, you can't talk about justice, you can't talk about fairness without talking about inheritance, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, because that's something that can cause so much conflict. And the Quran, it lays down some very clear guidelines about that.
Inheritance. I mean, it's a cornerstone of social justice. And if you look at verses 7 and 11, you see this really detailed breakdown of inheritance laws. It's amazing. Outlines specific shares for men, for women, parents, siblings.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first read through those verses, I was like, oh man, all these fractions and shares, I need to brush up on my math skills.
Right.
But then I started to think about what those fractions actually represent. And it's amazing because think about the context, right? Before Islam, inheritance practices, they were often so skewed. Women, orphans, they were incredibly vulnerable.
So true.
And these verses, they were revolutionary. They were completely overturning that system.
Imagine, a society where women were straight up denied inheritance,
Yeah.
and orphans were basically easy targets to exploit.
It's amazing. And just by laying out these inheritance laws, it made this huge impact. It shifted social norms. It created a system that was so much more just.
Absolutely, and it speaks volumes about, about what the Quran is trying to do. This social reform, this focus on people who are marginalized. It wasn't just about like your personal piety, right?
Yeah.
It was about creating a just society, like from the ground up,
Yeah.
where everyone's rights were protected. And I think that leads into another really crucial aspect that this Jews highlights, this call to strive for righteousness,
Yeah.
especially when you're facing, when you're facing adversity.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. That really resonated with me too. That whole section of the Jews where it's like this incredible sense of resilience, right? Like hold on to your faith, especially when things are tough. It's almost like acknowledging that hardship is like part of life,
Yeah.
but it's how you respond. That's what really, really matters.
It's not about just getting through life without any storms, is it? It's about going through those storms and coming out the other side with your faith intact.
Yeah, and you see that in these verses. It's like they're giving us the tools, right?
Totally.
This deep inner strength, this commitment to righteousness that doesn't waver.
And I think verse 197, it really captures that beautifully. When it talks about how worldly distractions, they're fleeting, they're like a small enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
Before this final refuge.
Oh, I love that.
It's like this reminder to, keep things in perspective.
It's like that saying, right? Don't get so busy making a living, you forget to make a life.
Yes. Exactly.
And these verses are reminding us what really matters, what matters in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. And, that ties right back into what we were talking about before about resisting greed and materialism.
Right.
This whole emphasis on justice, on fairness, on caring for people who are vulnerable, it's all connected. It's all part of this striving for righteousness.
It's not just individual, right?
Exactly. It's societal.
It's like recognizing that our actions, they don't happen in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
They have this ripple effect
Totally.
that impact the world around us.
And speaking of impact, these verses, they don't shy away from, like, the complexities of interacting with people who have different beliefs, right? Especially what it calls the people of the scripture.
Right. It addresses that relationship between Muslims and people of the scripture.
Especially, Jews and Christians. It's like it's highlighting common ground.
But then also, like, where they diverge. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Take, for instance, verse 93. So that's discussing dietary laws, right? What was permissible for the children of Israel. And it's interesting because it's acknowledging that shared heritage,
That Abrahamic root.
Right. It's recognizing that dietary restrictions, they existed even before, the Torah was revealed.
Right.
But then it also makes it very clear that Muslims, they're bound by the specific guidelines that are revealed in the Quran.
Yeah, it's like this balancing act almost. It's acknowledging that shared history, but also being really clear about its distinct message.
A delicate balance. And then you have verses like 100 and 149, and they're cautioning against blindly following the people of the scripture to the point where it compromises your own faith.
Okay, yeah.
It's about staying grounded in what you believe,
Right.
even while you're, engaging with these other perspectives.
That makes a lot of sense. Although it's interesting because there are also those verses that talk about how within the people of the scripture, there are people who are truly devout, who are righteous.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't just like paint everyone with the same brush.
You're picking up on such a crucial nuance because the Quran recognizes that righteousness, it's not limited by these, religious boundaries.
That kind of sense, yeah.
Yeah. Like verse 113, it describes this group from the people of the scripture. And it says they stand in obedience and they're like reciting God's verses all through the night.
So it's not about saying this entire group of people, this is who they are. It's saying, no, within any community, there are people who are sincere, who have that deep faith.
Yes, exactly. And we should focus on those shared values.
Yes.
Faith, righteousness, striving for good. That's what matters.
Which is such a powerful message.
It is.
Especially, thinking about, again, the world today where it's so easy to just focus on the differences.
Totally.
This is saying, no, let's build bridges. Let's focus on that understanding. And that makes me think about something else that really stood out to me, this emphasis on community,
Oh, yeah.
on supporting one another, on coming together to work towards a shared good.
It goes way beyond just your personal piety, doesn't it? There's this thread of collective responsibility that runs all through these verses.
Yeah, like this interconnectedness.
Yeah. It's about unity. It's about understanding.
It's like that saying, right? Stronger together.
Yeah.
But this is like rooted in something much, much deeper.
It really is. In verse 103, it just says it so beautifully. It's talking about how believers should hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether. Don't become divided.
Oh, I love that.
It emphasizes that unity, that togetherness. It's so important. And it even goes back to like a reminder of when they were divided.
Oh,
And it says they were on the edge of a pit of fire.
wow.
And that's when, God rescued them.
That is such a powerful image, though, when you think about like how fragile communities can be, right?
Right.
How easily those divisions can weaken people.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think about how do we actively work to build that unity, you
Mhm.
know?
It's so important.
Yeah.
And this sense of shared purpose, it isn't just about that immediate community of believers either. Because verse 104, it takes it a step further. It talks about the need for a nation inviting to, all that is good, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong.
So it's taking it beyond just taking care of your own. It's about like being a force for good out in the world,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Speaking up against injustice, promoting righteousness in everything you do.
It's recognizing that we all have this role to play, right?
Yeah.
In shaping a world that's more just, that's more compassionate. And our actions, they have an impact even beyond, what we might realize day to day.
It's interesting, right? Because as we've been talking about these themes, guidance, justice, community, I'm struck by like, they're also connected, aren't they? It's like this tapestry almost of how to live a righteous life.
It's beautifully interconnected.
And it all comes back to that very first thing we talked about, that call to follow Abraham's example, to incline yourself towards truth.
You put it perfectly. It's about taking these really specific verses that we've looked at and connecting them back to this much larger tradition of faith. Because living a righteous life, it isn't just about you, is it?
Right.
It's about, working to build that just and compassionate society.
Yeah, that is such a powerful thought to leave everyone with. And I think as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on Surah An-Nisa, I'm just so struck by like how relevant these verses feel.
No.
Even after all these centuries, it makes you realize how much wisdom is packed into these scriptures.
They offer this timeless guidance, don't they? This insight that goes beyond just one time or one place. They're speaking to something much deeper about, like, what it means to be human, wherever you are on your own journey.
It's true. So to everyone listening, thank you. Thank you for coming along on this deep dive with us today. And remember, we've really just scratched the surface here. These are rich, they're complex verses, and we really encourage you go out there, keep exploring them on your own, see what resonates with you, and think about, what questions come up for you.
Absolutely.
And feel free, we always love hearing from you, so share any reflections you have, maybe on our website or our social media. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep.